This is Josh White with JW Math Tutoring. I'm back with another great video for you today, and this video is going to talk about how to improve your ACT math score. Now, before I continue, make sure that you like this video. If you find it helpful, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and also sign up for notifications so that whenever I post interesting and informative math content, you can find out about it right away. So let's go ahead and get started and see how you can improve your ACT math score.
But life is a dream that calculus could never predict.
So this video is going to be similar to a previous video that I did, which was how to study for the ACT math section. Now, this one's going to be a little bit different though, because this is going to be a little bit more specific and a little bit more granular, whereas that previous video was a little bit more general and kind of broad and generic. Also, this video is more targeted to those people who have already taken, the ACT maybe at least once or possibly more times, and have earned a score that they're not happy with and that they want to improve, or maybe they need to improve because they need a higher score either to gain admission to college or university, or need a higher score to qualify for some type of scholarship. So with that being said, the first step that you're going to want to do is complete 2 practice tests. Now, if you've already taken the ACT, meaning an official test, and that test happened to be in April, June, or December, and you also ordered the copy of the test that you took, then you can just go ahead and use that result as one of your practice tests. If you don't, meaning if you did not take the ACT in one of those months, or maybe you did but you didn't order the official results of it, that's fine. Then just go ahead, take one of the old previously released practice tests. You can find many of them online, and I'll have links in the description below to where you can access them. Or there's also one full-length test on the ACT's website that you can use as well. Now, the reason you want to take 2 tests instead of just 1 is because 2 tests, especially with regards to the math section, will cover a lot more areas than just 1, and will help you identify areas that you need to focus on, that you need to improve on, that might not have been on a single test if you just completed that. So ideally, you want to complete, again, 2 practice tests to begin with, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next step in the process. So once you've done that, basically you need to grade the practice tests, and then more importantly, you need to analyze them. So, what do I mean by analyzing the practice tests? So obviously it's not just going through and, marking everything as right or wrong. That's just the grading. But analyzing means going through and basically classifying every problem that you either answered incorrectly or that you guessed on but also got correct as one of the following groups. Okay, so you either need to classify them as these problems as careless errors, knowledge errors, or unknown material. And what I mean by those 3 categories are: careless errors are problems where you knew how to solve the problem, you knew the material, you knew the steps to do, but you made some kind of, stupid mistake. A lot of times these mistakes would relate to arithmetic errors. So you added 2 numbers incorrectly, or you did addition instead of subtraction, or something along those lines where you divided at one step where instead you were supposed to multiply. So these are errors basically where you knew how to do the problem, you should have gotten the correct answer, but for whatever reason you had a brain fart and you didn't. The second type of classification grouping is knowledge errors. So these are going to be problems where you have some familiarity with the material or some idea of how to solve the problem, but as you're going through, you made some type of process error as you were trying to solve it. So there could be some gray area between these first two categories, careless errors versus knowledge errors, but knowledge errors are basically, where you're making an error on the problem because you're doing something that, you think is right but is mathematically incorrect. Or maybe you get to like some step in the problem where you don't know what to do next. So in other words, you know how to do the first step in the problem and the second step and the third step, but maybe you don't know quite what to do at the very end in order to get, the final answers. And then the third type that you want to classify, these problems as are unknown material uh, problems. So these are going to be problems where they have material that you have never heard of or never seen before, have not learned in any of your math courses at school. Typically these might be the problems on the last like 20 or 30 on the test itself, but they don't necessarily have to be in there. Occasionally, we've seen problems with vectors or matrices, in the first 15 or first 20 of the test. But these are basically problems where you look at it, you have no idea what to do, you have no idea what the problem is asking for or talking about. Now, again, I just want to stress that not only should you need to do this for the questions that you answered incorrectly, but you also need to pay close attention to questions that you answered correctly but were guessed. So in other words, when you go through and you complete an entire practice test, and which ideally should be within the 60-minute time limit. In other words, you want to adhere to the same time limits you're going to have in the test. Or, I mean, if you have accommodations for extended time, then obviously, based on whatever those accommodations are, still want to complete the test within those limits. So you want to make sure that you're not just going through and highlighting all of the incorrect answers and just ignoring all of the correct ones. Because again, there could be answers that are correct, but solely because you guessed on the problem. I mean, and even if you got it down to 2 or 3 answer choices, that's fine. But you want to make sure that you look at those problems as well. It's not just the wrong answers, it's also ones that were correct where you guessed on as well. Now, in addition to classifying, all of those types of questions into the 3 categories, what you also need to do is try to identify questions or problems that could be solved using different methods. And so what I mean by that is, as you're looking over problems, and this step could apply to ones you answered correctly as well, you want to get in the habit of looking for problems that you could instead have solved using maybe the technique of back solving, which is basically taking the answers for the problem and plugging them in and working them out to see which one is correct. Or the strategy of picking numbers, where you pick numbers for the different variables, or maybe it's a single variable in a problem, and then work it out to see which of the answer choices has to be correct. Or another type of thing to try to look for and identify is problems that could be solved using a graphing calculator, because there's tons of different functions on a graphing calculator that you can use that can either solve problems in their entirety from start to finish, or can assist you in solving problems by doing part of it for you. Now, at the beginning, it's probably going to be difficult for you to identify these alternate solutions because you might not have heard of them and might not be familiar with them, and might need to see exactly what they are or how they work, basically to have them explained to you, and that's fine. So to figure out what they are, how they work, or see more importantly, how problems could be solved using them, basically what I would suggest is look for solutions online to these questions from the practice test that you completed. So whether that's, YouTube, whether that's Reddit, maybe that's whatever other message boards or forums or Discord, other places online. But basically, you're trying to find or see, alternate methods that you could use to solve the problems. So now, once you've done that, once you've gone through your 2 practice tests, once you've analyzed them, then what you really need to do is basically identify, the topics or areas that you are going to focus on, that you're going to practice with, that you're going to learn, or most likely relearn if we're talking about, material from algebra, geometry, or other math courses. Now, as I said, most of these areas will include the topics from math courses you've previously taken. So, algebra, geometry, possibly probability and statistics. Or, I mean, if you've taken the Math 1 through Math 4 sequence in your school, topics from those courses. But you also want to make sure you include the strategies and techniques that I mentioned, just on the last slide, and graphing calculator operations as well. Again, if you're not familiar with those, if you are not familiar with back solving, with picking numbers, with the whole idea of process of elimination, with how to use the graphing calculator to do operations on matrices or solve a system of linear equations or graph, a system of linear inequalities with shading or find the zeros for a quadratic equation, and so on and so forth. You need to focus on learning those and understanding those as well. So it should not be exclusively on math topics and math areas. You also need to focus on strategies and techniques and graphing calculator operations. Now, most of the topics that you find will probably be from the Group 2 classification that I mentioned, the knowledge errors. In other words, the problems that you answered incorrectly because of careless errors, I mean, you need to pay attention, of course, to try to not repeat those careless errors again, but most likely there is not a knowledge gap, associated with that problem or with that topic. It's instead those that you classify as knowledge errors, those are the ones that you really need to focus in on and again review and either learn or relearn. Now, you can also add some topics from the third group, the unknown material classification, but most likely the second group is going to be your primary focus when you're identifying the areas that you're going to review and want to practice with. And as I mentioned again, just going to stress it one more time. If you don't know the strategies and techniques, like again, back solving, picking numbers, they also have different names, like plugging in the answers is another way that back solving is called. Choosing numbers is just a different way of saying picking numbers. And the graphing calculator operations. Make sure you familiarize yourself with those because there are, anywhere from like 15 to 25 questions on each test that you can solve using those techniques, or using the graphing calculator. Now, once you've identified the areas that you're going to focus on, then you've actually got to go ahead and learn, / review the material. So where do you learn the material? Where do you review material that maybe you learned in class previously but have since forgotten? So in terms of learning the material, there are multiple places online you could go. Obviously, YouTube is a good resource. Khan Academy is a good resource. You can obviously also use, actual physical books as well, or, PDF copies of them. So like The Ultimate Guide to ACT Math is a very highly recommended book for learning, math, ACT math related material. But there's lots of other ones out there as well. Textbooks, basic algebra textbook, basic geometry textbook, or so on, are another possible resource, where you can learn or review, material. And then after that, what you want to do is basically do some reviewing and or practicing of the material. So for these, You could use, again, old official tests. Obviously, you could use books as well because, for example, the Ultimate Guide to ACT Math is set up such that it's got different chapters, and then at the end of each chapter, there's basically like a chapter test, so to speak, or a chapter review of, anywhere from like 10 to 25 problems. Obviously, textbooks as well, a chapter test at the end of a test, a chapter review, things like that. And again, similar Khan Academy. So the first step is actually, say maybe learning the material, actually watching things, reading about it, taking notes on it. And then kind of the second component of that is the actual practicing of it. So completing questions, practicing, seeing if you get the answer correct on a question, and then looking at the solution. And again, related to what I was talking about before with the strategies and techniques and the graphing calculator operations, being able to look at problems and again start identifying which problems you can solve using alternate methods is a very important thing to focus on as well, in addition to the actual math knowledge itself. Now, once you've done that, then and once you feel confident, it's time to go ahead and do the next step, which is to complete another practice test. Again, you want to take it under test conditions, and you want to analyze it just like you did with the 2 practice tests at the beginning. So again, that means keeping it to the specified time limits, completing the whole thing in one sitting. And the analyzing of it, again, should be similar to what you did in step 2. So that's going through after it's graded and identifying the questions not only that you missed, but also that were correct but guessed on as one of the 3 categories. Either as careless errors or knowledge errors or still unknown material. However, now you should hopefully be to the point where you're able to better identify the alternate solution methods. So in other words, you're able to recognize, oh, I should use picking numbers on this problem because I see that the answer choices all have letters in them, they're all formulas, and it gives me some specific information in the problem about the specific variables in terms of one of them has to be positive and one has to be negative, or one's even and one's odd, or, whatever the specific problem says. And also when you can use, the graphing calculator, either to solve a problem entirely or to help you solve a problem. Now, if, say, even after completing another practice test and having, done some reviewing and, learning or relearning of material, you are still coming across, say, problems that you do not understand the solution to or do not understand, maybe why you got them wrong or incorrect, then also make sure that you're asking out for help. So whether that's on YouTube, going to watch a solution to maybe, a specific practice test or a specific problem from a test and then leaving a comment below about not understanding this specific question, or on Reddit, on one of the subreddits for the ACT, or maybe on Discord, or asking your friends that are studying for the test as well, or whatever, a math teacher at school, or someone else, anyone else that you come across at school. So the point is, don't be afraid to ask for help for problems that you're still having difficulty, understanding the solution to. And one last important thing to do as well, after you're analyzing this new practice task that you've completed, is identifying any new topics that you did not come across previously, on, say, the last 2 practice tests that you completed. Because not every single official test is going to cover every single topic from, algebra or from geometry. So anything that's new that you maybe was not on previous tests, you need to make a note of that and kind of, add that to your list of topics that need to be studied or reviewed. So now that you've gone ahead and you've gone through, all the previous steps that I've listed, basically all you're going to do at this point, to continue to practice, improving your ACT math score is just essentially repeat those steps. So, you're just going to go ahead and you're going to, after you take the most recent practice test, then you're going to analyze that, classifying the different types of errors. And you're going to possibly look for, areas that you need to review that weren't on the previous practice tests, or areas that you maybe did review but you're still having difficulty with or still not fully understanding. Or also looking for new topics, that you haven't been exposed to or are not familiar with, haven't learned your courses in school, and identifying those as well. And then after that, of course, then you move on to the step of actually learning, reviewing, refreshing the material. Going back to your sources, going back to watch videos on YouTube or Khan Academy, or using a book, if you have a book, or going in textbooks, looking at old official tests, and practicing these new topics. And then eventually, once you spend enough time, once you feel comfortable with them, then it's time to take another practice test. So it's basically just, it's slow and steady improvement by repeating these steps and going through them, kind of over and over again. And one thing to be aware of is that the improvement that you're looking for, might not be instant. So it might take several tests, or even several weeks, possibly even several months, depending on where your current level is, where your current, say, initial practice test scores were, in order to see the improvement that you're looking for. Now, some people, though, have seen almost instant improvement, especially with regards to understanding the strategies and techniques, like back solving and picking numbers, and using the graphing calculator, and the operations that you can do on that. So if you've never been exposed to either of those areas, and you learn them, you practice them, you apply them on problems, and you learn to identify when to use them, then, I have seen students show, almost instantaneous improvements in their practice test. But that's not going to be the case for everyone. For other people, it might be a very slow and very, steady process where maybe it's, 1 point on the next practice test, and then maybe, it's another 1 or 2 point increase, but it's not until you take 2 more practice tests. So just be aware that depending on where you are kind of in your understanding of the math knowledge, it might take a significant amount of time in order to improve your score from where you're beginning at to where you want to get to. The other thing just to keep in mind and be aware of too is, as you're repeating these steps, as you're kind of going through the process, over and over again, another important thing to work on is being able to identify, the quickest and easiest method that there is out there to solve a problem. So that might mean, using the calculator whenever possible. That means using the techniques when possible. And even if you see a problem and you know exactly how to solve it using the traditional way, which maybe it involves, factoring the problem and then solving the equation from there, the key is that a lot of these techniques or alternate methods to solve the problems can save you time. And unless you're a person who is breezing through the test and finishing the entire 60 questions in only 45 or 50 minutes, then most likely you need as much time as possible to get through all 60 questions. So the point is, even if there is a problem that you know how to solve and you know maybe the traditional way to solve it, if there's a quicker way, if there's a more efficient way, you want to get in the habit of identifying that and practicing that and using that. Just to save yourself time on the test for harder questions or more difficult questions, or questions that you're really having trouble understanding. And now just the last thing to be aware of is I want to make sure that you are being realistic, about your goals towards the test. And so what I mean by that is, if you have a target score, whether it's a 20 or 25 or 28 or maybe or higher, 32 or 33, okay, unless you're aiming for essentially a perfect score, you don't need to know or understand every single question. especially if your target score, is in that lower range, whether it's just a 20 or 25. So the point is, you don't need to spend time, or waste time essentially on problems that are particularly difficult or, particularly challenging. And this could most likely include like the last, 20 or 25 questions on the test, especially if those problems are on material that you have not learned yet. So, if you do not know anything about trigonometric identities or law of sines or law of cosines, I mean, obviously, if you want to, you can spend time learning that. But the point is, it's probably a much more productive use of your time to go ahead and focus on other areas, that you have learned in your courses you've taken, but might have forgotten. So, some information about. And so like I said, you want to focus primarily on the areas and topics that you know how to do, or maybe previously knew how to do but have since forgotten, and or those that you can easily learn how to do as well. So even though you might not have taken a course that dealt with probability and statistics, there are some basic topics related to probability or related to statistics like mean, median, and mode that you can learn fairly easily, which appear quite frequently on the math section of the ACT. Now, there are obviously more advanced ones as well. So the point is, you don't need to necessarily spend time on the more advanced or more difficult topics, depending on what your score goal is and how close you are to achieving it. So with that being said, I hope this video helped you out and gave a little better guideline on how to improve your ACT math score. Again, if you like this video, please click the like button on it so that more people can see it. Subscribe to the channel, sign up for notifications, and just the last thing to mention also is my new Improve Your ACT Math Score course on Teachable is now up and running. It includes over 10 hours of video instruction, and it covers strategies and techniques. It covers graphing calculator operations. Of course, it reviews algebra, it reviews topics in geometry, it reviews topics in probability and statistics, in addition to some other miscellaneous topics as well. And almost all the problems used in it are from old official ACT tests, and every section also has basically a practice worksheet at the end of it of anywhere from like 25 to 35 problems, so that even once you go through all the lectures which have practice problems, there's also, sets of practice problems for you to do on your own just to make sure you understand everything that was covered in the section. All right. Otherwise, feel free to leave comments below if you have them, but hope you enjoyed this video.